West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Two members of Congress, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and Congressman Hank Johnson, have been trying to pry answers out of the court for months, and they both join me now. Gentlemen, I'm honored to have both of you here today. Senator Whitehouse, I'd like to start with you. You both sent a letter to Chief Justice John Roberts in September with specific questions about the court's knowledge about these lobbying efforts. They replied back a month later without responding to the specific factual questions you asked and essentially said there are rules that the court follows. You then followed up with more questions after the New York Times published Rob Shank's allegations. They then pointed back to the denials, but again did not specifically answer your listed questions. Senator, putting aside the obvious obfuscation here, what are the specific questions you are trying to get to the bottom of, and what's your reaction thus far to how the court has responded?
Well, first of all, let me say how great it's been to work with Chairman Johnson on this, and I'm great to share the stage with him right now. The fundamental question is that the Supreme Court, while it says it has an ethics code, has no means for receiving complaints, has no means for conducting inquiries, has no process for investigation, has no need or effect to get to a final decision, and then never makes a public or rarely makes a public disclosure of what it's done. So there's a boneless quality to the ethics code over there, and you really can't have real ethics without real procedure. And what these letters, both of them back to us, confirmed is that the Supreme Court has absolutely no procedure to enforce the ethics code, and with no procedure to enforce the ethics code, it's really nothing more than a wall decoration.
Yeah, Congressman Johnson, given the court's lack of cooperation thus far, what are the next steps to be taken from here?
Well, thank you for having me, and it's a joy to be with my friend and honored colleague, Senator Whitehouse, working on these issues. And our courts, our Supreme Court in particular, has enjoyed being able to operate in complete secrecy without accountability for centuries now. And they've depended on the American people to have confidence in their operations of themselves and in their ability to self-regulate. And what has been disclosed recently in the New York Times, the Rolling Stone, Politico, is a culture of unaccountability and, frankly, a culture of whining and dining and unaccountability by justices of the Supreme Court to private interests. Parties, as well as lawyers appearing before it, have been able to have secret influence with the court. And so a vast lobbying operation has been recently revealed. And what we aim to do is get to the bottom of it. And what the letters that we have sent to the Supreme Court and the responses have shown is that the Supreme Court is incapable of being judge and jury over the operations of itself and its members. And so that means that there has to be some oversight, some outside oversight, and we're moving towards that in Congress.
Senator, one of the ways that you're trying to advance this initiative is you and the congressman have introduced the Supreme Court Ethics, Recusal, and Transparency Act. How would that bill restore trust in the Supreme Court, and what are its enforcement mechanisms? Because that's really the biggest question there. You can introduce it, you can tell them to do it, but how do you make sure they actually live and die by that sword?
Yeah, well, we'll have to judge what their product is, but the first thing we require them to do in this bill is to put a code of ethics on themselves. And that would include an enforcement capability, a process. Again, you can't have justice without process. And so there has to be a process, and we'll evaluate what they propose. And if it's not good enough, then we'll have, time to give up and just do our own for them. But the two areas, other than having rules themselves, that we focus a lot on, the first has to do with recusals and making sure that there's a real recusal process and that people don't just walk away from a recusal question without disclosing why they decided not to recuse and leaving a record of their justification for it that can be tested, again, against that ethics process. And then most important of all, I think, is transparency. The justices need to be reporting gifts and emoluments and hospitality and favors in the same way that members of Congress do, in the same way that members of the executive branch do. They give themselves a huge pass on this that is not the case for other federal judges or other senior federal officials. So they're real outliers, and we need to fix that. And we also need to fix the flotillas, the little orchestrated flotillas of dark money funded front groups that come in as what they call friends of the court, amici curiae, to file briefs that instruct these judges what they want them to do. And that's a particularly dangerous problem for the court, because it's very likely that the people funding those amici curiae briefs are the same people who funded the selection process at the Federalist Society that picked these judges and the political process at the Judicial Crisis Network that campaigned for them to get on the court with tens of millions of dollars. So it's way too cozy by far.
Congressman Johnson, there's been a little bit of a dance that's been going on between you all and the general counsel for the court. We've seen the letters, we've seen the commentary back and forth. What can you do next, though? Can you bring these people in to testify? Can you have the justices come and account for their actions? What are the next steps to be able to advance this ball instead of maybe just waiting to see whether or not the Transparency Act actually moves forward itself?
Well, we have to really be careful about intruding the legislative branch on the operations of the judicial branch, a co-equal but separate branch of government. It's supposed to be a delicate balance of power in this country between three co-equal branches. And so being careful so as not to tip the scales, so as to make one branch of our government unequal to the other is always an important consideration. But the fact that we would not be able to subpoena justices to appear before a committee of Congress doesn't mean that that branch is not accountable to Congress. And so there are certain mechanisms that we can use to bring interests of the Supreme Court, representing the Supreme Court, to Congress. And we'll start that process in the House in the waning days of the 117th Congress. There'll be a hearing next Thursday, December the 8th at 10 a.m. before the full Judiciary Committee on the topic of undue influence, Operation Hyatt Court, and how the politicking at the Supreme Court has impacted its ability to be a fair arbiter of the facts and the law in cases that come before it. And so we will have people who can talk about what's happening at the court. The court is also aware of these hearings, and they will be able to see for themselves what the legislature is headed towards. And perhaps that will spur them into action to get moving on some accountability measures for themselves without us having to act. And last but not least, the American people will begin to see the lack of accountability that is within our Supreme Court system, and start supporting more and more congressional moves to bolster the court's ability to be a co-equal branch of government that has the respect of the American people.
I'm not going to be waiting with my bated breath for the Supreme Court to have it come to Jesus on its own without your assistance. Senator Whitehouse, I do have a question to you. Finally, we have covered Ginny Thomas's activism around the 2020 election extensively on this show. What remaining questions do you have about her particular influence campaign and about her husband's refusal to recuse himself from cases that are related to that election?
Well, there are two very obvious questions. The first is, what did Justice Thomas know about her activities, and when did he know it? Because that will bear on whether that initial refusal to recuse himself had any propriety to it. And the second is, what was Justice Thomas's justification for refusing to recuse himself in more recent cases, once it was clear that he knew about his wife's activities, because we all had found out about his wife's activities because they're on the front page of every paper in America.
It is Friday, the 2nd of December of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all night hawks in the Diner of Life, indeed. Well, are apologies needed for yesterday? I feel like I should make an apology, turning to clips rather than the usual diatribes. So I had to let the clips do my diatribing for me. But yeah, I apologize for that yesterday. Some last minute, responsibilities here at the mothership. Sometimes real life intrudes, as if this is not real life. Jeez. Anyway, apparently the show does go on, but in an altered state. So we made it so. Thanks for bearing with us. And, you still got the weather and the two amuse-bouche at the chef's table. So all was not lost in the end. Yeah, everything is fine. I had to reassure my mom. She had we'll just say she had a moment. And the problem is that having moments means that blood pressure could spike, her poor little heart could go aflutter, and we don't want that. So, turns out everything's fine. And so, how are you doing in spite of this apparent, is it apparent now? Nazi takeover of America, the normalizing of anti-Semitism. Let's give them a platform. Well, actually, Ye. Ye's been suspended from Twitter. And I got to tell you, all it took was the EU threatening Elon Musk. You tone it down, buddy. We're out of here. And you can't play. And I think Elon realized, I'm not going to be fulfilling my responsibility of spreading Nazism around the world if a bunch of the world isn't letting me get in there to change everybody over into Nazis. Well, not everybody, because, see, what will happen if everybody's a Nazi? They won't have anybody to throw into the death camps. Oh, you know what? I forgot. They'll find a way, and that way is purging their own. The enemy within. That's what the Night of the Long Knives was about. That's right. Anybody that had the ability to supplant anybody else who was in power, oh, that guy looks like he's a good orator. I better get rid of him. And they did. That person might be politically astute. Got to get rid of them. And they did. And I guess that's what's happening now. I suppose reasonable voices in the GOP have been purged. Yeah, I want to spend more time with the wife and kids while I can. I don't blame them. Political violence is now normalized as a way of life here in America. And because we, by and large, don't want to play that game, we're so boring. You don't make good TV. No, we don't. But policy and running a country and making sure people don't die by the millions because of a pandemic, I don't know. If you could make it into a Lifetime holiday special, maybe people would follow the recommendations. Maybe. Yep. Got to find some city slicker who wants to slow down their lives, get a B&B out in snow country, where nobody comes because they can't get there. But for some reason, that B&B is so warm and homey, all alight. Not in Texas. Unless they have their own generator. And even then, you don't know. You can't use a generator. Okay, great, thanks. We'll freeze. Yeah, well, that's Texas for you. But, yeah, we should have a Lifetime movie about people, I don't know, taking care during a pandemic. And write the plot so that it's at a B&B in snow country where no one can get to. But it's all warm and homey and alight. I always love those Lifetime movies. I hate them. Anyway, here we are. It's the holidays almost. Well, in some instances, it is a holiday from Thanksgiving, that time of year. I guess we're going to continue calling it Thanksgiving for a little while. All the way to New Year's. Isn't it just one long holiday? That's what I always thought it was. Yep. But interspersed in the midst of it is the daily responsibilities of, paying the bills, getting food on the table. Unless you're partying in St. Bart's. It always amazes me that people who run industries who then pretty much decimate their industry's workforce to a skeleton crew, and in the process, their shareholders make out like bandits, get all these dividends, and the people running the whole show, they're making out like bandits too. All these high, percentage to labor salaries that the CEOs get, so that they can have Saturdays at St. Bart's. Gotta have cocktails on Saturdays at St. Bart's. So you've decimated your industry down to a skeleton crew, and this skeleton crew wants 7 days of paid sick leave? Now, one of two things is going to happen in this. Either they're not going to be able to, and this was suggested to me, by the way. I think it's by an unreliable narrator. But nonetheless, they're going to have to order a single of their cocktail rather than their usual double. But I have to say, I've had a few cocktails, not only in St. Bart's with, the well-to-do, shall we say. And I think what would be of more concern is that they're going to get a double anyway, no matter what. And they're going to be concerned, number two, on whether they're going to have to forego that fourth martini, and that must not pass. You need that fourth martini to get back to your little grass hut with the jacuzzi. Okay, well, I guess the railroad workers they don't get any sick day leaves. Do they get any sick days? They can't have it. How are people going to be able to staff when you don't have any staff anymore? Well, they've automated it this far, right? Remember when we were growing up and we would watch these Saturday cartoons and automation took over, to make our lives so much easier and everything, and everybody lived like the Jetsons? Everybody. I used to watch that and think, wow, the Jetsons are living way up in the sky in that giant penthouse in the sky. And no one ever talked about, what about the people living down there on the ground? What are they doing? Never panned down to the ground. Never. And we all thought it was going to be like the Jetsons. So here's the railroad industry. They've automated down to a skeleton crew. Has life become better for those people who used to work in the rail industry? How about the people who are still working there? No, I don't think so. They're no more than cogs in the machine. And if there's anything that a billionaire hates is when a cog starts whining. You want sick leave? We replace cogs around here. Get out. You're fired. That used to happen back in the day. You had to hide that you were sick or injured so that you could keep your job or to even get a job. Okay, well, I don't know. 7 days of paid sick leave seems like a really common sort of labor practice. What the hell is going on here? Maybe they need to hire a few more people. Automation doesn't seem to be taking care of the job. Okay. All right. Well, why don't we get away from all of that? Oh, should I mention that Trump has lost his special master? I got to say real quick, even the special master thought the special master gambit was BS. Okay. Raymond Dearie. Judge Raymond Dearie, even he thought, what the hell am I doing here? What am I doing? I can't be reading this stuff. All right. Well, that's how Trump works. And everybody says he could go to the whole 11th Circuit, but the guy who runs the 11th Circuit was part of the 3-person panel, and 2 Trump appointees and 1 Bush appointee. I think it was the elder Bush. Was it? Maybe it was GW. But nonetheless, Republicans, okay? Because somehow in this world, if you're a Democrat, that just taints the whole process. We can't have a Democrat doing anything of importance here. So they even had, Trump judges, and Trump's thinking, wait, I put you there specifically to break the law, and you're talking about following the law? That's how Trump thinks. He's so transactional, all right? I put you here, I appoint you here, and when I may come to you for a favor. All right. And so apparently even the Trump judges are saying, I don't know, that it might mean that we have to let a lot of black and brown people out of jail because they're going to have access to shutting down an investigation into the nefarious deeds like feeding their families. We can't have that. Jesus. What about all these women getting abortions, and we're trying to convict them for being murderous witches, and they have access to shutting down the investigation? We can't have that. So somehow that has saved the constitutional rule of law. Somehow we've appealed to the right wing to where it really hurts. If we actually follow their policies to the bitter end. Even they don't like it. So it beggars the question, why'd we start off on that process in the first place when we kept telling you what was going to happen? And it is now happening exactly as you were warned. Stupid Democratic hippies. They would never say Democratic, but I just have to. Oh, yes. let's get back to what we have curated for you here today after that last tangent. And at the top, as we begin here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, yes, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and Congressman Hank Johnson are demanding accountability from the Supreme Court. Now, I call that bipartisanship, okay? We're never going to get the maggot Nazis on our side, and do we really want to? On the rest of the menu, the $20 billion allocated to Indian country under the American Rescue Plan will affect 2.6 million people. A rural Arizona county finally certified its midterm election results after a judge ruled Republican supervisors broke the law when they refused. And immigrant rights groups sued Ron DeSantis and other Florida officials over the constitutionality of their migrant relocation plan. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the trial of Hong Kong newspaper publisher Jimmy Lai was postponed when the territory's leader asked China to block him from hiring a British defense lawyer. And Australian economist Sean Turnell, who spent almost 2 years imprisoned in Myanmar, received a hero's welcome at Australia's Parliament House. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and we thank Kelly for doing so. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page from that chat room link to the left near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it would really help. If you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, if those funds could be sent to us once a month, it really does help us pay our bills. And as you know, bills keep a-rising, and they never seem to go down. Never. But anyway, thank you for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many years ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter while we still can, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter while we still can, and you can do so at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's at, 10 minutes before showtime. And that gets linked up with Twitter and other social media platforms in case Twitter just, I don't know, goes by the way of the dodo. Remember that? Who does? Anyway, the show notes and links will take you to the actual articles in which we are referencing here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And if you wanted to follow the show on Twitter while we still can, you can do so at Cookbook West. And you can always pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., 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 etc. Okay, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this fabulous Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life, is from the American Independent by the great Oliver Willis. The Treasury Department released a report detailing the impact of the 2021 American Rescue Plan has had on Indian country, noting that the $20 billion delivered was the largest single infusion of federal funds into tribal governments, communities, and businesses in U.S. history. In a statement issued by the Treasury Department to announce the report, Marilyn Malerba, the Treasurer of the United States and the lifetime chief of the Mohegan tribe, said, "Today's report shows that state and local fiscal recovery funds are having direct, deep, and meaningful economic impacts on tribal nations' pandemic recovery. By investing in tribal economies, we are fostering economic prosperity for our nation at large." Malerba was appointed treasurer in June by President Joe Biden and is the first Native American to serve in the position. The funds sent to Indian country were part of the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds program that was created after the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan passed Congress and was signed into law by Biden. The law was passed with only Democratic votes in the House and the Senate, with a tie-breaking vote in the Senate cast by Vice President Kamala Harris. The new report notes that the $20 billion allocation has been distributed to 579 tribes and impacted more than 2.6 million members of those tribes. More than 3,000 project proposals submitted by tribal governments were approved by the Treasury Department. Funded projects include expanding the availability of health care on tribal lands by recruiting more health care workers and increasing vaccination sites and health campaigns. Native American communities have historically faced significant health care disparities as a result of systemic racism and discrimination. Jonathan J. Cooper of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A rural Arizona county certified its midterm election results on Thursday yesterday, following the orders of a judge who ruled that Republican supervisors broke the law when they refused to sign off on the vote count by this week's deadline. Two Republicans on Cochise County's three-member board of supervisors balked for weeks about certifying the election, even as the deadline passed on Monday. They did not cite any problems with the election results. Rather, they say they were not satisfied that the machines used to tabulate ballots were properly certified for use in elections, though state and federal election officials have said they were. Secretary of State Katie Hobbs filed suit on Monday, as did a local voter and a group of retirees, asking a judge to force the supervisors to certify the election, a process formerly known as a canvass. Hobbs said she is required to hold the statewide certification on December 5th and, by law, can delay it only to December 8th. At the end of a hearing on Thursday, Judge Casey McGinley ordered the supervisors to convene within 90 minutes and to approve the election canvass by the end of the day. "I am not ashamed of anything I did," said Supervisor Peggy Judd, one of the two Republicans who twice blocked certification. "And today I feel I must, because of a court ruling and because of my own health and situations that are going on in our life. I feel like I must follow what the judge said today." Well, you know what? You should. The board's other Republican, Tom Crosby, skipped the meeting. 2 hours earlier, Supervisor Ann English, the board's lone Democrat, urged the judge to order the board to immediately certify the election and to not wait another day. She said Crosby is trying to stage a smackdown between the Secretary of State and the election deniers at a meeting scheduled for today, Friday. I think it's a circus. That doesn't need to happen, English said, so I've had enough. I think the public's had enough, so I'm asking for a swift resolution of this, if that is possible. The vote allows the statewide certification to go forward as scheduled on Monday. Hobbs, who was elected governor in November's election, had warned that she may have to certify state results without numbers from Cochise County if they are not received in time, an outcome that would have tipped the balance of several close races. The county's 47,000 votes went overwhelmingly to Republicans, which means throw those votes out and we might have some more members in Congress. Wouldn't that be nice? The board represented themselves in court after struggling to find someone willing to take their cases. The elected county attorney, who normally represents the board in legal disputes, refused to handle the cases, saying the supervisors acted illegally. The board voted hours before the hearing to hire a Phoenix area attorney, but he was not able to get up to speed before the hearing and did not inform the court he was representing the supervisors. Days before the November 8 election, the Republican supervisors abandoned plans to hand count all ballots, which the court said would be illegal, but demanded last week that the Secretary of State prove vote counting machines were legally certified before they would approve the election results. On Monday, they said they wanted to hear again about those concerns before taking a vote on certification. A meeting is scheduled for that purpose today. There are two companies that are accredited by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission to conduct testing and certification of voting equipment, such as the election tabulators used in Arizona to read and count ballots. Conspiracy theories surrounding this process surfaced in early 2021, focused on what appeared to be an outdated accreditation certificate for one of the companies that was posted online. Federal officials investigated and reported that an administrative error had resulted in the agency failing to reissue an updated certificate as the company remained in good standing and underwent audits in 2018 and early 21. Officials also noted federal law dictates the only way a testing company can lose certification is for the commission to revoke it, which did not occur. Staff brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and other officials are being sued in federal court by immigrant rights groups who challenge the constitutionality of the state's migrant relocation program. The suit was filed yesterday, Thursday, by three groups: Florida Immigrant Coalition, Americans for Immigrant Justice and Hope, and the Hope Community Center, against DeSantis and State Transportation Secretary Jared Perdue. It was filed in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District in Florida. Earlier this year, the Florida legislature approved a $12 million budget item to relocate people in the U.S. illegally from Florida to another location. The money came from interest earned from federal funds given to Florida under the American Rescue Plan. And of course, the only way to earn interest is not to dole out the money from the American Rescue Plan. The lawsuit claims that the appropriation creates an incoherent definition of unauthorized alien that is inconsistent with federal immigration laws, considering these people are asylum seekers and are here, by definition, legally. The immigrant rights group claim that the ill-defined designation may include people whose presence in the country and Florida is authorized by the federal government, but who now risk harassment for merely wishing to either enter or stay in Florida. In September, Florida officials arranged flights from Texas to Martha's Vineyard that carried 49 mostly Venezuelan migrants to the island where former President Barack Obama owns a home. Local officials were not told in advance that the migrants were coming. DeSantis, a Republican of course, reclaimed responsibility for the flights as part of a campaign to focus attention on what he called the Biden administration's failed border policies. He was joining Republican Texas Governor Greg Abbott in the tactic of sending migrants to Democratic strongholds without advance warning. The Martha's Vineyard flight has also spawned lawsuits accusing Florida of lying to the migrants in San Antonio to get them to agree to the flights. The Florida's governor's office and the Department of Transportation of Florida did not respond to emails seeking comment from the Associated Press. Well, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, The Mighty Pen. Me Too is such a common refrain these days that it's hard to remember that its popularization is a very recent phenomenon. It was just in 2017, in fact, when the New Yorker and New York Times led the way with exposés on Hollywood producer and, as it turned out, chronic sexual predator Harvey Weinstein, a.k.a. the guy who, along with his brother, founded the film powerhouse Miramax. She Said is based on the book of the same name by Times journalists Megan Twohey and Jodi Kantor. The duo is played here by Carey Mulligan and Zoe Kazan, respectively, and it follows just how exactly the story developed. If this sounds a bit like another movie, Spotlight, about Boston Globe journalists exposing child sex abuse by priests in the area's Catholic diocese, that's probably intentional and not in a bad way. Both procedurals focus on powerful men preying on the vulnerable and show how other influential actors helped to cover it up for decades. She Said makes it abundantly clear that Weinstein couldn't have gotten away with his behavior had it not been for a phalanx of help, unwitting and otherwise, including accountants, DAs, and Hollywood executives who said nothing for the sake of their careers. Speaking against Weinstein never ended well, and the less powerful the people trying were, like up-and-coming actors or staff, the less successful they were, to the point of derailed careers. She Said is a smartly done and easy-to-follow picture and sends a message about strength in numbers, the power of journalists, and the need to believe women in general. It also makes clear how tedious investigative journalism can be, with potentially fatal setbacks always threatening the project. Here, though, the truth does prevail, and for that alone, She Said is worth a look. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. Hundreds of miles southeast of New Zealand, you'll find the windswept Bounty and Antipodes Islands. It's there you'll find the breeding grounds of what may be the world's most punk rock penguin, which sports twin bleached blonde mohawks.
So it's like if you took a penguin and you put its flipper in an electricity outlet and it got a shock. That's what you might imagine it looks like.
Lloyd Davis of New Zealand's University of Otago says the erect-crested penguin, as it's known, also has a peculiar breeding strategy. The females lay 2 eggs, but generally leave the first one to die.
They just plop the egg down on the rock, and it's just bizarre to see. And then 40% of them, they just turn their back on it. They don't even attempt to incubate it. It's like, I don't care about that.
Davis says that's unusual because most birds pour resources into the first egg and the second and however many more, but the last egg is almost an afterthought.
The final egg just acts like an insurance policy for them, so that if they lose one of the other eggs, then they can rear the chick from that one. But this is quite the opposite, because in this case, and this is why it's such a conundrum in the biological world, is that they don't favor the first egg, they favor the second one.
Davis and his colleagues traveled to the Antipodes Islands in 1998 to investigate that conundrum. And in reanalyzing their data, they've narrowed down the possible explanations for the behavior. For one, they think the penguins might reject that first egg because it forms while the birds are migrating. So it's smaller, inferior perhaps, to the second, larger egg. And the penguins may also be acknowledging a reality many species face. They simply don't have the resources to raise 2 kids. The results are in the journal PLOS ONE. Davis says when he visited the islands almost 25 years ago, the penguins were the least studied penguins in the world. He says they still are, and now they're endangered.
They seem to have gone down about a third of their population based on the evidence that we have, and yet we know nothing about them. We know nothing about the causes, and we need to do what we can to protect these wonderful and forgotten penguins.
After all, you could say the birds themselves are already putting all of their eggs in one basket. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm probably okay. I open the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
The Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. In 2008, the Supreme Court, 5-4, ruled that those words about a well-regulated militia functionally are meaningless and created an individual right to gun ownership for self-protection in your home. Then, in 2022, the court expanded the right from gun ownership for protection in the home to carrying a gun for self-protection outside the home. Noteworthy, the 2022 right to carry decision affirmed a statement from the 2008 case that the Second Amendment right is not unlimited and does not include the right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. In 2022, after the massacres at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde and the Tops Supermarket in Buffalo, and before the massacre at Club Q in Colorado Springs, Congress passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, a law that regulates gun ownership somewhat, but does not address, for example, sale and ownership of military-style assault weapons. Passage of that law, combined with the Supreme Court's statements, demonstrate that while court decisions matter a lot, guns remain a political and policy issue about which elected officials still have the right to legislate. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2009. That was the day that Walmart agreed to pay $40 million to over 87,000 current and former employees in Massachusetts. This was the largest class action settlement in the state's history. The lawsuit, filed in 2001, accused the retail giant of denying workers rest and meal breaks. The company also allegedly refused to pay overtime, manipulated time cards, and required workers to work off the clock for free. In other words, Walmart was accused of wide-scale wage theft. The retail giant decided to settle the case rather than take it to trial. That was not too surprising, since the company had already settled 63 similar federal and state class action wage and hour lawsuits. The total tally Walmart paid out due to wage theft was a whopping $900 million. Under the terms of the Massachusetts agreement, any person who worked for Walmart from August 1995 to the settlement date received a payment between $400 and $2,500. The company was also required to put measures in place to ensure that wage theft stopped. This included a hotline that workers could call anonymously if they were made to skip meal breaks. Walmart also agreed to use a clock-out, lockout program that prevents workers from using store cash registers if they are not actually clocked in for work. In an affidavit filed with the settlement, the lead counsel for the employees said the accord dwarfs settlements of similar class actions against Walmart across the country. Not surprisingly, the company has strenuously resisted all efforts by its store employees to join and form unions. Wage theft, not getting paid for all of the hours you actually work, continues to be a major complaint of low-wage workers and is an important issue for today's labor movement. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 31 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the low to mid-40s, generally cloudy, with winds light and variable throughout the day, and considerable clouds this evening, some decrease in clouds late, lows in the mid to upper 20s, winds light and variable, and then partly cloudy skies in the morning. Tomorrow, Saturday, will give way to cloudy skies during the afternoon with highs in the mid-40s, winds light and variable, and then rain coming in on Saturday night, continuing through Sunday, maybe even into Monday. And then snowy mix about the middle of the week beginning, which we never really got here at the mothership. We are still expecting it, though. Pollen remains rated as none here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index is in the moderate range and has gone up a little bit to 73 parts per million, obviously from wood-burning fireplaces, and I should say wood debris piles being burned as well. They do that around here. The daytime UV index is in the low range at level 2. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.2 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles. And relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 44 degrees and partly cloudy. Paris is 41 and cloudy. Rome is 53 degrees with light rain. Kyiv is 27 degrees and cloudy. Kabul is 43 and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 61 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 44 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 60 degrees and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 40 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York, New York is 41 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Kenneth Leung of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. The trial of a Hong Kong newspaper publisher who was arrested in a crackdown on the city's pro-democracy movement was postponed yesterday, Thursday, after the territory's leader asked China to effectively block him from hiring a British defense lawyer. Jimmy Lai, age 74, faces a possible life sentence if convicted under a national security law imposed by China's ruling Communist Party on the former British colony. The Hong Kong government objected after judges on Monday approved Lai's plan to hire Timothy Owen, a veteran human rights lawyer. Chief Executive John Lee asked China's ceremonial legislature to decide whether foreign lawyers who didn't normally practice in Hong Kong could be rejected for national security cases. Beijing imposed the security law after pro-democracy protests that started in 2019. If Beijing intervenes, it would mark the sixth time the communist-ruled national government has stepped into the city's legal affairs.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Rod McGurk of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Sean Turnell, a Australian economist who spent almost 2 years in prison in Myanmar, received a hero's welcome yesterday, Thursday, at Australia's Parliament House, where lawmakers rose in a standing ovation, and the Prime Minister praised his courage, optimism, and resilience. Turnell, an advisor to Myanmar's elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi, was among American, Japanese, and British citizens released on November 17 as part of a broader prison amnesty during Myanmar's National Victory Day celebrations. Days after Myanmar's military seized control of the Southeast Asian country in February of 2021, Turnell was arrested while preparing to leave the country. He was sentenced in September to 3 years in prison on charges of violating the country's official secrets law and immigration law. The 58-year-old Sydney resident and his wife sat in the House of Representatives on Parliament's final sitting day. Turnell did not speak to Parliament, but he described his ordeal and his joy at being reunited with his family in an interview with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. An interrogator had told him, he would never see his wife or child again. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.